Posted by you/musician_monolith. People who used to not believe in ghosts but do now. What experience changed your mind? I have a story. So in high school, I worked kids' birthday parties. The place was basically a giant gym, and gymnastics dance classes were also held there. One day, I came in, and one of the girls I worked with, who was very spiritual and very religious, was totally freaked out. During the gymnastics class she taught that morning, one of the kids was staring up at the ceiling. When she asked the kid what he was doing, he said there's a little boy up there and pointed at the ceiling. Strange enough, but whatever. Kids are weird. Later, two girls who were working a birthday party before mine came out of the gym and were visibly shaken. A pair of 5-year-old twins went down a slide and then stared at the ceiling. They both said that there was a little boy up there, in the same spot on the ceiling that the kid from the morning gymnastics class. We all went in and inspected the ceiling. Of course, it was just a regular, gray, warehouse-Y ceiling. But we were all super freaked out at that point. During my party, I was pushing a little boy on the giant swing we had in the gym. He, too, began to stare at the ceiling. He said directly to my face, "Hey, there's a little boy up there." We told all of our co-workers and managers about the 3 separate experiences we had today with children from different parties and classes seeing a little boy on the ceiling. The next day, we had downtime between parties, and nobody was in the gym. There are cameras in the gym that allow parents to see their children playing from the lobby. My manager called us out of the break room, "Guys, check this out." We come out and see the screen, which is streaming from the gym, showing that giant swing going back and forth. Nobody's in there. It's just the swing going. I like to think that the ghost was truly a little boy who just wanted to play, and he finally got to go on the swing. Could be worse. I'm still not sure if I believe, but there have been some weird things in my life that I can't explain. When I was 5 years old, I woke up in the night and my grandma was standing at the end of my bed, wearing a teal blue skirt and a matching blouse. I remember that it was summer and the sky was still light but not light enough for me to read, so I guess it was about 9 p.m. I sat up, she put her finger to her lips and I rubbed my eyes a couple of times, 'cause sleepy, and when I looked back she had gone. I just snuggled back under my covers thinking how nice it was to see her because I hadn't seen her for ages and I hoped she would still be there when I woke up. Next morning, my house was eerily quiet. My mum was in a worse mood than normal, but she had been crying so I asked her what was wrong. My grandma died the night before. She had been crossing a road after her bingo turned out, at 8:30 p.m., about 60 miles away from where we lived. She had a massive brain hemorrhage in the middle of the road and didn't even make it to the other side, let alone to my house 60 miles away. She was wearing a teal blue skirt and matching blouse. Once when I was in university I went to go see my therapist whom I had been seeing twice a week for about 5 months. On this day he was uncharacteristically quiet and I asked him if he was alright. He said he was fine, and we continued through what would be one of our most breakthrough sessions. A lot of repressed memories came up through it that have helped me to heal. At the end of the session I asked him why he was acting differently today than other days. He said when I walked in I was accompanied by a warrior-like person. He said he had the overwhelming feeling to perform as best he professionally could that day, and that he got the sense this warrior had fought a lot of battles to protect me. This would seem coincidental, except for 10 years later I was living on the other side of the world. I had a Puerto Rican neighbor I would see occasionally and eventually got pretty close with him and his family. One day as I was walking by he kind of gets quiet and weird and then says in broken English, "Do you know there is a soldier who follows you around?" I knew instantly who he was talking about. In both instances the warrior/soldier was described the same, just over 6 feet, blonde curly hair, wearing primitive warrior clothing, and strangely a white guy. Neither of these people could have known that my closest brother who passed away at 14 was over 6 feet tall with blonde curly hair, and always was my protector. I was 8 when my grandma died. I was sad. So around 2 months passed and I was going at grandma's house where my grandpa lives. So I wake up at 3 a.m. and hear footsteps from bedroom door. I froze. I saw my grandma walking up to me and she said hello little sweetie and walked away. It was not sleep paralysis because I could move my hands and feet. At morning I told to my grandpa about it and he said I've seen grandma almost every night, she likes to visit, so don't be scared next time when you visit. Sorry for bad English, English is not my first language. I was visiting my mother after my dad died. She went shopping with her sister and left me alone. I heard my dad as plain as day up in his room. He got up from his computer chair, walked over to the door and opened it. He walked down the stairs and stood on the last step for a few seconds before walking back up to his room and closing the door. I was probably 5 feet from him in the living room. I just froze. It scared the hell out of me. My wife and I swear that our daughter used to talk to ghosts when she was a toddler. She was an only child at the time. First instance I remember was her telling me that she was talking to Nana. That's what I called my grandmother, who passed about 15 years before my daughter was born. My daughter was young and so I hadn't even talked about Nana to her, so I showed her a picture and asked who she spoke to. There were 4 women, 3 of which I didn't even know, but without hesitation she pointed to my Nana. Okay, no biggie. Some months later, my wife and I are trying for baby number 2. After my wife gets pregnant, my daughter is sitting next to her on the couch and puts her head on her belly and says, "Mommy, there's a baby in there." Okay, maybe that's coincidence. She overheard us saying something. A few weeks later, my wife miscarries. Maybe my daughter picked up on our sadness, who knows, but she again puts her head on her stomach and says, "Mommy, there's no baby in there anymore." Then, several months and one more, very early, miscarriage later, my daughter tells us, "I was talking to my brother last night and he said that my sister is coming to live with me soon." Again, she's an only child and had no living brother. We were still trying at this point, but had not taken any tests. We picked one up that night, and sure enough, pregnant. When time came to reveal the gender, I wasn't even interested. My daughter had already said it was a girl. Sure enough, I have 2 daughters. A while after my grandma died, my mom and I were looking at a photo of her we had on a shelf. She was never a nice person. Till the moment she died she refused any help from anyone, but was quick to steal and lie. My grandma also didn't like my mom. Anyways, I mention how in the photo she's not smiling and how she never really smiled in life. My mom agrees with me and then the glass cracks straight across my grandma's lips in the photo. My mom took the picture down the next day. Sorry, I didn't think the post would really get this much attention, so I didn't put a lot of effort into detail. I would see a large dark figure that I believed to be a man who would walk the halls at night. I would see things happening or hear things happening, like a cup would fall off the counter or items on an entry table move. One evening I remember seeing a black figure that was smaller, size of basketball, run across my bedroom floor, hit the wall, and went under my bed. As I was convincing myself it was imaginary, my mom came running in since she heard the thud. At the time we hadn't all concluded the ghost thing, so I didn't say what it was but ran out the house and spent the night at my friend's because I was terrified. My mom experienced many times the feeling of someone sitting on her bed. She said she'd think it was one of us and look, but there wouldn't be anyone there, just an indent as if someone was. There's more, but I'm at work, my break's over. I'll have to keep typing later if there's interest. When I was about 10 to 14 I had terrible insomnia. I would imagine things and felt incredibly unsafe, as though I was being watched, although I never admitted this to anyone. I began only sleeping on the couch, with my back against the wall, and had to have the TV or some sort of light on. I missed an immense amount of school because of this, so my mom had me see a neurologist. The neurologist diagnosed me with some things, but the crazy part was during my sleep study I slept amazingly well, no issues at all, and slept in the real bed. Eventually I got transferred to a children's hospital, and speaking to the doctor I explained. I would see things and felt uncomfortable. They had thought I was experiencing sleep paralysis. When they told my mom, she went ghost white. She pulled me aside and explained she was experiencing things, too. She described in detail what I was seeing. That evening she approached my brother and asked broad questions: "Do you have anything weird happen in home?" etc. He also described what we experienced. It was then I realized we must have paranormal activity, and I've believed it ever since. When we moved out of that house, all my sleep issues abruptly stopped and I haven't experienced it since. My girlfriend's grandfather's ashes were on a little shelf in the living room, right next to a very solid/heavy angel statue. Well, one weekend she and I are fooling around on the living room couch, and out of the corner of my eye, I see the angel statue fly off the wall, accompanied with a deep grunt. Now when I say this thing flew off the wall, I'm talking 7 to 8 feet of air before landing on the hardwood and leaving a dent where the wing hit. Even if this thing had fell off the wall, it would have dropped straight down, not soared with force. Well, we both stood there in shock, and I whispered if she had heard the grunt as well, to which she agreed. So we both booked it for the day. Well, that night at dinner we told her parents what happened, leaving out the naughty bit, and Megan's younger sister burst into tears saying she had seen a dark figure at the foot of her bed the last couple's nights but didn't want anyone to think she was crazy. Grandfather that died had mental health issues that caused a lot of pain. Vape. After that day I was a believer. Worked at a public pool. I would work alone after hours cleaning the building and the pool. One night around 2 a.m. I'm cleaning the change rooms. The pool has been closed for 4 hours at this time. I hear the sound of a child's laughter and bare feet running across the pool deck. I go out and scan the area, there's nobody in sight. The doors are all closed and locked, there is nowhere a kid could be hiding. No wet footprints on the pool deck. I recheck the doors and the security monitors. I am the only person in the building. It was unsettling. I still don't believe in ghosts. But I did have a strange experience. I had a cat who I found in a ditch many years ago. She was cute and I pet her, so she followed me back down the train tracks about a mile to my home. I opened the door for her and she went in. She was offered the opportunity to go back out, and did for a moment, but then came back in. She was mine forever. I've had many pets over the years and loved them all. But this one was different. She wanted to be near me all the time. I'd often said I'd never had a cat who made me feel like my personal space was being violated before. She followed me up to bed every night and purred me to sleep. She died fairly quickly. I barely even had a chance to say goodbye. I knew she was ill, having been diagnosed with hyperthyroidism, which cat owners will know is not a good thing to hear. Although progress has been made, ask your vets about the pens. They've worked miracles for my current cat who also has it. They vomit their food up and waste away slowly, eventually succumbing to either congestive heart failure or kidney damage. She had taken a turn for the worse and I thought her treatment wasn't working. On examination, they found tumors in her stomach and liver. She had been dealt a mortal blow and was only going to suffer harder and harder. In the most painful one I've ever had to deal with, I put her down and she even meowed one last time before the end. I forgot to mention that this cat was also the most talkative I've ever had. She frankly wouldn't shut up. I buried her in the yard to keep her close and tried to go to sleep, completely beside myself with grief. As I lay down, I heard something familiar. I live in an old house and my bedroom doesn't have a door, so I installed one of those plastic sliding doors. The slats it's made of make a telltale clacking sound when they're disturbed, like they did when a cat pushes in between them and the doorframe. I heard this, and a moment later, I felt the foot of my bed compress, and could feel the mattress deform around my feet, up beside my legs and roughly to my hips. I looked. No cat. I don't know how to explain this. I don't believe in ghosts and I'm sure grief can cause some pretty significant psychological disturbances. A quick perusal of my post history will very quickly show I am anything but cuddly, but I was absolutely in the kind of deep grief where one would expect that, as I love that cat more than basically anything else. Even typing this now, years later, is making my eyes well up with sadness for my lost friend. I could write off the sound of the plastic slats as a breeze or a hallucination. Older members of my family said they saw my father after he died, and I've read about grief-induced hallucinations before. But to feel my mattress deform like that, in exactly the way she used to circle my feet and come up beside me, I don't know what to think. Most of my family is extremely religious and believe in ghosts wholeheartedly. Most of them claim to have seen something paranormal at some point in their lives. I wasn't very religious, and I always thought to myself, if I haven't seen it, then it's not real. That changed during my senior year in HS. I was dog-sitting at my great-aunt's house while she was out of town for a few days. A little after midnight, I'm watching a movie and my aunt's dog starts barking like crazy and runs up the stairs at full speed. The dog was small, but fierce. Suddenly, I clear as day heard a gravelly voice at the top of the stairs say, "Bad doggy." The voice was deep and masculine. I went upstairs because I was certain nobody else was supposed to be there. I looked around and there was nobody in sight. The dog was still barking at something that I couldn't see. She was just barking at an empty hallway. That's when I heard footsteps walking away from us down the hall and into my aunt's bedroom. I could hear the footsteps, but I couldn't see anybody making them. I noped the fuck out of that house with the dog and went outside in my car. The dog and I slept there for the night. I'm not entirely sure WTF I experienced that night, but I definitely believe in the paranormal now. I never told my aunt about what happened, but apparently my great uncle, her husband, had died in that house a few months after I was born. I never knew him, but I'm willing to bet that it was him who I heard that night. Up until my mid-20s, I would have told you there's no such thing as ghosts. Most things that people say, I think is their imagination, or wishful thinking. Now, I don't know. I just don't know. When I was in my 20s, and newly married, my spouse and I moved for his job. We needed to find a place to live pretty quick. We lucked into the perfect house. It was old. In its previous life, it had been someone's beach cottage. Which I loved. What's better than living in a resort town, close enough to walk to the beach? Plus, it wasn't in a resort area. It was on the back half of someone's property, with one road in and out, and lots of trees and shade. Very quiet. No other people around. Because the house was originally a weekend cottage, it was one big room, with a small addition to one side that contained a kitchen and bath, and another addition off the back that had a bedroom. The big room was awesome. All windows on 3 sides, with a nice breeze most of the time. A fireplace. Lots of open area. The only thing that kinda pinged my radar was the landlord. When we rented, he was overly insistent that we sign a year lease and we couldn't break it for any reason. No matter what, we needed to pay out the lease, whether we lived in the house or not. I thought that was a little weird, the way he kept repeating that over and over because he wanted to make absolutely sure that we understood. But it didn't really register, at the time. Other than I was a bit worried that maybe there were troublemakers or noisy parties on the beach or something. He assured us that it was a very quiet neighborhood. But he repeated again that we couldn't break the lease. I worked a 9-to-5 job. My spouse worked 12-hour on/off shifts. So there were lots of times when I would be home by myself. The first month or 2 were fine. I liked the house. I liked the neighborhood. I liked the beach. I'm mostly a homebody, so when the spouse was at work, I would stay at home reading or watching a little TV or cooking. I'd always wanted to learn to knit, so I bought some yarn and started teaching myself. Then sometime around the 3rd month, I started to get very strong feelings that someone would be standing behind me while I was reading. You know, like looking over my shoulder. It only happened when I was alone in the house, and only when I was in the main room. Without thinking about it too much, I started sitting places where my back was to the wall, or reading in the bedroom. When I went to bed at night, I started closing the door between the bedroom and the rest of the house. I felt safe in the bedroom. Sometimes when I fell asleep in front of the TV late at night, I'd wake up to catch someone standing in front of the fireplace, just out of the corner of my eye. I thought I needed to stop dreaming so much. But I started to stay in the bedroom after dark, with the door shut. Things started not being where I put them in the big room. I got kinda irritated with my spouse for messing with my stuff. I wasted 5 to 10 minutes almost every day looking for my handbag, or my car keys. Then one day when I came home after work, I found my knitting yarn wrapped and tangled around all the furniture in the big room. I don't mean just a little bit. I mean the yarn was strung between couches and wrapped around the legs of the chairs. I told myself that my spouse was playing a trick on me and I cleaned it up. Then I decided that I wouldn't mention it to him, just to see how long it took him to come clean. He never did. I moved my knitting to the bedroom. My sister came to visit for a long weekend. I'd gushed so much about our lovely beach house that she came to visit and see the beach. She came for a 4-day weekend. She slept on the pull-out sofa in the big room. After the first night, she told us that the sofa wasn't very comfortable and she thought she was coming down with something, so she changed her travel arrangements and she was leaving that afternoon. She seemed agitated, but she wouldn't talk about it. A few days after she went home, she called me. She started the conversation with, "I know you don't believe in ghosts and maybe I'm just being stupid." My heart dropped. I thought I was the only one and I was being so stoic and pretending I never saw or heard anything. She went on to tell me that after she went to sleep that night in the big room, noises woke her up in the middle of the night. She thought it was one of us, but no one was there. Then, while she was sitting in the bed looking around, the windows started opening and closing. It just kinda went around the room. One window opened and closed. Then the one next to that. Then the next one. And the next one. Then she heard footsteps walking straight towards her. But no one was there. The footsteps walked right up to the bed where she was sitting, then over the bed, continued across the room, and out through the side door into the kitchen area. She said she ran out the front door and spent the rest of the night on the front porch. She came back inside when the sun came up, waited for us to wake up, and made excuses to go home. She didn't want to spend another night in that house. She said, "I know you won't believe me. That's okay. But I'm not ever sleeping in your house again." I told myself that my sister had always been a little nutty about stuff like that, so knowing that the house was old, she probably just had a very vivid dream. I kept telling myself that. A few weeks after that, just when I'd stopped jumping at every stray noise, I woke up one Sunday morning and went to cook a leisurely breakfast for me and spouse. And y'all, I still don't know how to explain this. I opened the kitchen cabinets to get the dishes out to start cooking. All the dishes were rearranged. Not messy. Not tumbled about. They were all very neat and orderly, but everything was on the wrong shelf. The shelf that normally held glasses now had plates stacked on them. The shelves that normally held bowls now had glasses on them. My first thought was that someone had been in the house during the night. I checked all the locks. Still locked. We didn't know many people and I couldn't think of anyone who would pull a trick like that. Besides, there was so much stuff moved that no one could do it quietly without disturbing people sleeping in practically the next room. So I did what any half-crazed, scared to shit person would do. I pretended it never happened. I pretended that I always kept the glasses on that shelf, and there was nothing strange about having all the plates on this shelf. I sure as hell wasn't moving anything back because I didn't want to see what would happen if I did. I cooked breakfast. I went on with my day. And later that afternoon, I told my spouse that I wasn't really comfortable in this house anymore. Could we find somewhere else to live? Amazingly enough, my spouse never asked me why. He simply said that was probably a good idea and let's find something quick. And we moved out. We called the landlord after we'd already packed and moved the furniture. He came over and picked up the keys. He never, not once, asked why we were moving. In fact, he never met our eyes. Just kept looking at the ground. We agreed to keep paying rent until he could get some new tenants. Months later, I asked my spouse if he ever felt anything strange in that house. He said, "Yeah, that wasn't a good house. Glad we moved." And we never talked about it again. Not about me, but this one's about my 3 brothers. We used to live in the Philippines where everyone believes in ghosts, duende, dwarves, diwatas, fairies, etc. Our old home was the second house built in our subdivision, so it was very old, with huge mango, santal and other fruit trees growing all over. As my mom had told me, my 3 brothers were playing around shooting these bamboo bow and arrows made for them by one of our helpers. It was all fun and games until my 3rd brother shot his arrow, and according to him and my brothers, it stopped mid-air and dropped. Needless to say, they found this weird and stopped playing. On the next day, my brother is suddenly hit with a high fever out of nowhere. They were going to take my brother to my aunt who was a doctor, but my older brothers told my mom about the arrow stopping mid-air. My mom decided to take him to an albulario, which is a practitioner of folk medicine, I think, correct me if I'm wrong. So my mom took my brother to this guy so they could find out what had happened, and what they could do. Once they met up, the albulario decided to do a ritual that involved dripping candle wax in water to see what caused the sickness. Once they did this, a small humanoid figure formed in the water, but it was missing a hand. The albulario told my mom that my brother probably shot an arrow and hit a duende's hand, which is why he got hit with a fever as punishment. I don't know exactly what they did to ask for forgiveness, but apparently my brother got better the next day after. I'll try to dig up more details if I can. I grew up in a very scientific family. I never knew my dad's stance on ghosts, but they were never talked about, so it really didn't matter. One day when I was in high school, we were eating dinner, and I decided to ask my dad about our old house, and moving into it when I was just a baby. So he told me a story. Apparently when we moved into this house, we lived there about a week before we started to receive gifts once a week. Every Friday morning, my dad told me that there would be some sort of handcrafted gift sitting on the mantle of our fireplace. My dad was reasonably freaked out by this because we were the only ones with keys to the house, and the last owner moved well out of state. So, he informed the local police, and they decided to patrol the property every Friday night looking for intruders. They found nothing, and as you could imagine, the gifts kept coming. So my dad told me they eventually gave up, and feeling helpless, he went to our local church. Eventually he had a priest come and bless the house, and we stopped receiving the gifts. What really freaked me out about this was the fact that my dad never believed in ghosts, and didn't mention once that a ghost was causing these gifts to appear. He's an engineer, so he always tries to debunk people's paranormal stories with a realistic explanation, but he was 100% serious with this story. One of the gifts we received we actually still have. It's a wooden sled with a small painting of a man, presumably my dad, pulling me and my sister on the sled. We received this gift about 8 months a year before my mother passed away from cancer, so that made the painting on the sled very freaky in hindsight. My dad only told me this story once, and he denied he ever told me it when I asked him about it recently. If I can find the sled, I'll post a picture. It's very small and looks quite old. When I was in my late 20s, I was dating my girlfriend, soon-to-be wife. We had been together for a while. One summer, July 3rd, her sister was abducted and killed by a group of 6 men. All the men were eventually caught and tried. The trials and the aftermath for the family were devastating and debilitating for them for many, many years. Fast forward 3 months, after the funeral. I arrived at my girlfriend's house to wait for her to get off from her job as a nurse at a local hospital. Neither of her parents were home. Just me, alone in the house. So I went into the family room, turned on the TV, sat down on the couch, got comfortable and began to watch. Clear as a bell, I heard my girlfriend's sister's voice in my right ear, just off my shoulder, call my name. I turned to look at the seat next to me, and of course there was nobody there. I stared at the spot in the couch next to me for a long while. Feeling a bit uneasy, I turned off the TV and went outside to wait on the porch. I was always on the fence about ghosts because there was no scientific evidence of them being real, and I was going through a big question phase with religion/afterlife at the time anyway. But my family moved into an old farmhouse when I was 12. This was a very old farmhouse with a build date around the Civil War. The original owner's name was still on the old barn out back, and we found numerous old antiques built into the walls when we completely renovated the place. A few odd and end things happened after we first moved in, but distinct things started happening to myself after I turned 16, but never to my sister until after she turned 16 too. The most prominent memory I have, the upstairs consisted of 2 bedrooms. One bedroom was the room at the top of the stairs, the second bedroom was in a separate room just to the left of the top of the stairs. I had the private room and my sister's room was the landing. When someone walked up the stairs it was very distinct, you could hear each individual step and the creaks got louder as the person approaching got closer. So one night I am sitting on my bed watching TV or something and I hear my sister come up the steps and go lay on her bed, so I start talking to her. When she doesn't answer me I get annoyed and go into her room to figure out what her problem is, only she is not in there. My mind was blown because I know I heard her. I call for her and she had been downstairs the entire time. We never felt threatened. But it did seem that this entity liked picking only on women. Even my mother, who absolutely doesn't believe in ghosts, had to admit some odd things had happened. I think the funniest thing was having my ponytail pulled while I was doing the dishes. I don't know why it was so funny. It just cracked me up that whatever it was felt like playing with my hair. So my grandma used to live with me. She was in the room next to mine and would get up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, which is in my room. There is drop from her room to mine, so we put a night light outside the bathroom so she could see the way. It was like this for about 12 years. Only a few days after she had passed away I was in my bed with my cat and dog reading a book or something. I remember my cat and dog both waking up and looking to the night light. My cat got up and went to the light, pawing at it and making nosies. My dog just stayed still, not barking. I would grab him so he would calm down or go to sleep, but he never took his eyes off that spot. That's when I saw what I can only say looked like light bend around the night light. I was positive it was my grandma coming back to use the bathroom and or check on me and the house. To this day, she died about 5 years ago, I still have that night light there and turn it on every night for her. I haven't seen her or experienced anything like it again, but I'm sure she's still around. My aunt used to live above a convenience store. It was a duplex and had a mud room that connected the front doors to each apartment. The other apartment was empty and unlocked, so my cousins and I would hang out in there. One night we are playing hide and seek in the empty apartment. My cousin and I are running from the seeker and the hallway door slams shut in front of us. We freak out and end the game because we are too scared. We tell our parents and my aunt happens to have a night vision baby camera. She sets it up in the living room of the empty apartment and we can all see it on the TV in her house. We are watching it for about 10 minutes, dust is flying everywhere and nothing is happening. Out of the darkness, a Pepsi can rolls up and hits the base of the camera. Everybody is like, WTF, this bitch is haunted. I never went up the stairs alone to get to her house again, I was too freaked out. About 3 years ago, the entire building burned down, unfortunately, I don't know the cause. In 2011 I was studying abroad in Morocco. We were staying in a riad in the Medina of Marrakesh with tall, ornate windows. I had one roommate who was already asleep this night. I thought I saw her sitting up in the bed next to me wearing all white. Suddenly I saw a white, hazy thing vaguely shaped like a person floating above me next to the big windows. I was so scared I went in the bathroom, turned the light on and stayed in the bathtub all night. My roommate didn't see anything. When I was in 5th grade I was playing with silly putty in my room when my mom called me down for dinner. I had molded it into a ball and placed it down directly behind me, I'm talking as soft as can be here. When I stood up to go downstairs, I felt something hit me in the back of my head with some force. So I turn around and see my silly putty ball, not on the ground anymore, but bouncing on my windowsill until it eventually rolled back onto the floor. Needless to say I ran downstairs hysterically trying to tell my mom what had happened. I was having a conversation with my mom when I was a teenager. Mid-sentence I felt a hand grab my arm and looked to see who it was. No one was there and my mom didn't see anyone. Apparently the same thing happened to my sister a few weeks before. Also all the random voices and bags falling off shelves and moving shadows in the periphery. I believe it was just the house that was haunted, but they weren't malicious so it was all good. Not about me, but this one's about my 3 brothers. We used to live in the Philippines where everyone believes in ghosts, duwende, dwarves, diwatas, fairies, etc. Our old home was the second house built in our subdivision, so it was very old, with huge mango, santal and other fruit trees growing all over. As my mom had told me, my 3 brothers were playing around shooting these bamboo bow and arrows made for them by one of our helpers. It was all fun and games until my 3rd brother shot his arrow, and according to him and my brothers, it stopped mid-air and dropped. Needless to say, they found this weird and stopped playing. On the next day, my brother is suddenly hit with a high fever out of nowhere. They were going to take my brother to my aunt, who was a doctor, but my older brothers told my mom about the arrow stopping mid-air. My mom decided to take him to an albulario, which is a practitioner of folk medicine, I think, correct me if I'm wrong. So my mom took my brother to this guy so they could find out what had happened, and what they could do. Once they met up, the albulario decided to do a ritual that involved dripping candle wax in water to see what caused the sickness. Once they did this, a small humanoid figure formed in the water, but it was missing a hand. The albulario told my mom that my brother probably shot an arrow and hit a duende's hand, which is why he got hit with a fever as punishment. I don't know exactly what they did to ask for forgiveness, but apparently my brother got better the next day after. I'll try to dig up more details if I can. A few friends and I used to work at this factory that was being repurposed into a community center. We were mainly on the factory floor, removing tiles, painting, etc., but there was an office portion of the building that was pretty much abandoned. When we were there late at night and we just wanted to chill, we'd go to the first floor of the offices and sit at one of the empty offices and just laze around. On one occasion, one of my friends and I, we'll call him Hank, got held back and had to join the rest of our friends later. When we got to the office area, we could hear our friends in the office area on the first floor like always. We were about to open the door when we heard one of our other friend, let's call him Bob, yelling for us from upstairs. We took a few steps back to look at the second floor landing, and there's Bob, sticking his head out from behind the door. He asks where we're going and to hurry up and come upstairs, that everyone was waiting for us. He closed the second floor door and we started climbing up the stairs. Hank and I didn't think much of it. Halfway up, one of my other friends, Scott, calls me and asks us where we're going. We say that we're on the stairs and we'll be there in 2 seconds. He asked me why TF we were going upstairs, and I explained that I saw Bob and he called us in. Scott claimed that wasn't possible because Bob was downstairs with him. Hank and I assumed we were being pranked and came downstairs, where Scott opened the door for us, only to see that Bob was indeed downstairs right behind him. This spooked the daylights out of Hank and me, as there was no way for Bob to make it back to the first floor without passing us, since there was only one staircase. Hank and I explain what we saw, but the others don't believe us. We all go upstairs to make sense of what we saw, but sure enough, the second floor was locked as it always was. Only difference being that the lights inside that were usually off were all on. Needless to say, we never went back to the office area. NSFW, I was one of the firefighters working on Ground Zero for 9/11. I lost 2 of my buddies, and it still haunts me to this day. As I was making my way through the rubble, I heard someone screaming. I bolted to wherever I heard the sound, and only found a twisted body on a rebar. The body was burnt and pale, and it looked like it had been there a while. I watched a firefighter walk up the rubble towards me, and hug me. I was confused, but I understood why he wanted a hug. I hugged him back, and when I opened my eyes, there was no firefighter. I stood there, holding a helmet. I don't know how I got this helmet, but it was in my hands. The golden eagle on the front had been bronzed, and a hole through the side of the helmet, with dried blood around it. I was holding this helmet in tears, while in front of an impaled civilian. I did some research, and the firefighter that I hugged had apparently died 3 hours before I saw him. I still have that helmet, and I will never forget the hug the fallen firefighter gave me. I hate to be lazy and copy one of my own posts, but it's just easier. So my grandfather died when I was in a very uncertain place in life. He didn't get to see me graduate college, because I flunked out and worked garbage jobs for 2 to 3 years before getting my act together. He ended up getting mesothelioma and went from a fit and healthy old man to a skeleton clutching at his chest and gasping for air within the span of a month. I got to say my goodbyes before he was really far gone. Was afraid of hospitals. But I did go in and see him while he was still lucid, and I think he preferred I see him like that when I said my goodbyes rather than the way my mom described him on his last few nights. We had that kind of mutual respect for each other, and sense of privacy. That man always thought I was smart, even when I was failing school and making terrible choices. I was always his granddaughter and treated the same way, with encouragement, F's on my report card or not. My grandparents' house was like my sanctuary when I was little. My mom had a lot of issues, and I lived through 2 divorces and countless out-of-state moves. But I could always count on my time spent with my grandparents to be peaceful. Until my grandmother's pain issues got really bad and she found, not so great, ways to cope with it. He also technically wasn't my biological grandpa, since my mom was adopted. It did not matter. I'd go to their house and eat home-cooked meals and play skip-bo with him till like 10 p.m. when it was finally bedtime. So the point of that massive wall of text, I loved my grandfather, he was a rock for me. When he passed I was upset, but he was in so much pain at the end I was also relieved for him. He was taken too soon, but life is a bitch and super unfair, so at least in that unfair end he didn't suffer as long as some people do. After he passed I started having dreams about him in their house. My grandmother had long passed by this point too. In them, we'd sit in the living room or at the kitchen table and he would just talk to me about things in my life. I very distinctly remember a dream where he warned me to get away from the abusive boyfriend I was seeing at the time. As time went on I got my act together and now I live a relatively comfortable life. I'm not rich or super successful by any means, but given the life I had, I beat some odds, let's put it that way. There was a reason I failed out of middle school and all kinds of other things, and as these years have gone by, I've had less and less dreams about him. Now I don't dream about him at all anymore. To date, my brother has had one dream about him when he was about to graduate college. And I'm so proud, dream. It actually took me a long time to realize I don't dream about him anymore. I still dream about their house all the time, but it's always empty. I had one single dream about my grandmother, and it was her in her kitchen making dinner with her back to me, which is a pleasant memory of how she was in life. I think the one dream from me my grandmother was her saying goodbye, but all those dreams about my grandfather were him essentially watching over me. And as I got my life together, he realized he didn't need to anymore, so he either moved on or moved elsewhere. And that's why when I dream about their house, it's still because I remember it as a safe haven. But now it's empty, because they're gone and have moved on. Which makes me happy and so terribly sad at the same time. But, at the same time, if my grandpa was confident enough in me now to trust I'd be okay, I must be doing something right. So I do firmly believe that loved ones can and do watch over people if they feel they're needed and there was a strong bond while they were alive. Your rationalization makes complete sense, too. But it might be okay to let yourself think you were protected by something unexplainable in that instant, especially if it comforts you in some way. I have two stories. The first used to happen when I lived in a large house that had been converted into several flats in South London. There was one flat above me and my wife, and we knew the woman upstairs quite well, and we would know she was out because her car wouldn't be in the shared driveway. On many occasions when the upstairs neighbor was out I would hear footsteps in the flat above me even though we knew the upstairs neighbor wasn't home. The floors were wooden and I could hear the wood creaking during the footsteps, so it was definitely something moving around up there. The upstairs neighbor didn't have a partner or friends that may be staying over. It was also far too small for anyone to live up there without us hearing or knowing. The second is a bit more strange than the first. In around 2001 a good friend of mine died of cancer in his early 20s. He was a tall guy called James and he had short blonde hair. Fast forward to around 2010 and my best friend's nephew, who was about 7 at the time, was round at his grandmother's house. The nephew was out in the hallway playing by himself when his grandmother, my best mate's mother, heard the young boy start up a conversation with someone in the hallway. The grandmother didn't think much of it as kids often chatter when they play, but when the nephew came into the front room the grandmother asked who he was talking to. The nephew said he was talking to James out in the hallway. Naturally the grandmother was a bit alarmed that someone was in the house talking to a child. She asked the nephew a few more questions about who he was talking to out in the hallway, and of course he gave a good description of my friend James, who had died 10 years or so beforehand and had been to the house many times before he died. The nephew would have never met James as he wasn't born when James died and would have had no reason to lie or make something up like that. That one gives me goosebumps even as I write it. After my Aunt Joan, Dad's sister, died at 40 of alcoholism, we had a few experiences. One, I was like 5 when this all happened and my dad and I were over at his parents' house taking care of it while my grandparents were out of state with one of my dad's remaining sisters. He was in the guest room and I was in the room my aunt slept in when she lived there in high school. My dad calls out, "I'm going downstairs now," and a voice like my aunt's calls out, "Okay." I asked him about this a few weeks ago, almost exactly 20 years from when it happened, but my dad understandably doesn't remember a lot from that point in his life, including that moment. 2. The day after the funeral for my aunt, my other aunt was back home in Pennsylvania. We are in Colorado where the funeral was held, and my living aunt was still having a hard time taking her sister's death. She and her husband walk in the house after getting home off their flight and find a message on their answering machine. It's from some stranger in New York who was asked to call my aunt's number and deliver the message that Joan is okay, you don't have to worry. He didn't know who the caller was, just that he was given the number and the message to relay. Pretty much my entire family understands it would have to be a coincidence of cosmic proportions if that's all it was. She's in a better place now. While I miss her, I know she was released of terrible suffering and I'm glad for that. My dad died. After I found out, I went home. My parents were separated, so my mom and dad each had a house. My mom is disabled and has a 2-story house. It's very hard for her to go up and down the stairs. My old bedroom was upstairs. I got in the house about 2 in the morning with my husband. We were laying in the bed and my husband instantly fell asleep. I was too upset to sleep. My dad died. After I found out, I went home. My parents were separated, so my mom and dad each had a house. My mom is disabled and has a 2-story house. It's very hard for her to go up and down the stairs. My old bedroom was upstairs. I got in the house about 2 in the morning with my husband. We were laying in the bed and my husband instantly fell asleep. I was too upset to sleep. Over a couple of weeks years ago, living with my ex, while we were in the shower together, the bathroom door got knocked on extremely hard and aggressively. Got out and opened it basically straight away, and there was no one there. No one was in the house and all the doors were locked. We also had the cliche footsteps, and I remember one night there was this weird music coming from nowhere but still in the house. That was whack. A Friday night, maybe Saturday, it was years ago now. Some teenagers from next door came and knocked, saying there was someone in the house with them. They were alone for the weekend, so my mates and I plus them and my partner went out with them. We saw the lights go out all at once but no one came out. The cops came and called for backup. They went through and found no one after looking for like 15 minutes. The thing is though, unless whoever was in there could climb 4 meters in a few seconds, the only way to the street was past us. They stayed with us the night, but we never heard anything about it again. They also moved away maybe a month after, I think. The last thing that went down over those weeks was the one that fucked with me the most. I heard as clear as day my name said right behind me and then footsteps above me while doing some early morning weekend work. I used to work in a very high security facility, and for someone else to be in the building they would have to have been let in by me and couldn't be in there before me, as the alarms couldn't be deactivated without my fingerprint. I almost shit myself, and after talking with my boss on the phone and checking that there really wasn't anyone else there besides me, no cars besides my work car and my private car locked in the grounds with the other work cars, there I bailed and never did Saturday mornings alone. After that, nothing ever happened and nothing before. I still think about those weeks all the time. It was fucking weird and I have no explanation besides fucked if I know, ghosts. My wife's mother died only shortly after we got engaged. My wife was the first daughter to get engaged and grandma was very excited. Both of her older brothers were married and had given her 5 grandsons but no granddaughters. Grandma's first response to the engagement was, "You're going to be the one to give me a granddaughter." We got married months after she passed and had our first child, a daughter, a few years later. We traveled to my wife's hometown to show off the baby as soon as possible, but she was about 6 months old by then. We went to see grandma's sister, who looked strikingly like grandma. My little 6-month-old girl freaked out when she answered the door. She almost jumped out of my wife's arms trying to get to her aunt. She got a second look and went limp and slumped in disappointment when she saw she didn't know this person after all. My wife and I were convinced that my daughter thought she was seeing her grandmother, who had apparently been visiting her from beyond or knew her before she was born, and that they had a very strong bond without having met in the flesh. This is gonna be buried, but I went to NYC to spend a week with a friend after I graduated. She took off from work, but there was an emergency, so she got called in, and so I stayed at her apartment with her dog. She told me she sometimes had off feelings in the apartment, but she had it blessed, so whatever. Anyway, me and Doggy are watching Bar Rescue at about 1 p.m. as we wait for her to get back, when suddenly the dog makes a low growl and runs to the kitchen. I think, hey, maybe she smelled a mouse, so I follow. I see the dog, crouched low and loudly growling at a human-shaped shadow figure, maybe 6 feet tall, who is standing back away from her. As the dog moves between me and the thing, I loudly gasp, and the thing's head turns to me and then its arms go up and it steps back in what looks like surprise. I don't think it thought it could be seen. I just managed to stammer out a prayer and tell it that it has to leave and not come back. It backs through the wall and it's gone. Terrifying, just terrifying. Since this post is getting more traction than I expected, I'll throw in a story of my own. I lived in a haunted house for basically all of my life. It used to scare the heck out of me when I was little, but I basically just got desensitized to it. We always experienced hearing footsteps, voices upstairs when everyone was downstairs, dogs following nothing around the room. Typical ghost stuff. Some of the stranger experiences include my grandma seeing her mother in her room at night. My mom seeing a ball of light floating in our hallway. My brother and I separately heard fingernails tapping on the walls of our bedrooms, and when we called our mom in to listen, the sounds would stop, then as soon as mom left, it would start again. We experienced this at different times, my brother for a week or so and then me, and without knowing that the other one was having the same experience. I had a desk toy in my room that had a little foam ball hanging from a chain on it. My cousin and I were playing video games and the ball randomly bounced like someone had tapped it from below. The kicker was when my mom started feeling like something was climbing into bed with her. She describes it as like a dog trying but failing to climb up on the foot of the bed. She thought it was my dad moving his feet, but then she felt it when he wasn't there and she was wide awake, so she knew it wasn't him. She kept this story to herself, and then a few days later my uncle stayed the night in the guest room and described feeling the exact same thing. At that point my mom waited for a day that everyone was out of the house. She opened up the windows and told the spirit that it either had to leave and move on or it wasn't allowed to bother us anymore. Since then we've gone from activity every day to one-off experiences every few months. We've been told by several people, who have slept in the guest room and had nightmares about it, that there is a portal in the closet of our guest room. Sometimes I think that spirits just pass through occasionally and cause a flurry of activity. I have more stories if anyone wants to hear more. I was probably in early high school or late middle school at home with my sister of 4 years younger and our dog. Our dog was very calm indoors and he rarely ever barked and never acted aggressive. All of a sudden, he got really aggressive/defensive near our back door/kitchen, and stared and growled at the corner ceiling of the room. The corner was completely empty, and there wasn't anything we could see. We tried to pull him away but he wouldn't budge. I checked the window curtains for any bugs or anything but nothing was there, and he fixated his gaze above the curtains. I went out to the backyard and peeked up and down my driveway as well to see if maybe my dog heard something from outside, but nope, opening the door didn't interest him at all. My sister and I kind of stared at each other, and that sent chills down both of our spines, as just our looks at each other confirmed we were both experiencing this thing. We didn't say a word to each other in the moment, but I'm pretty sure we were both thinking some paranormal shit was there that our dog sensed. I don't remember how or when our dog finally snapped out of it. My sister also experienced weird shit in that house, brand new in a nice suburb, multiple times after, but by herself each time. I have a couple of stories, even though nobody believes them. Good thing I have witnesses, so my mind is at peace. As a background, growing up I was always taught by my dad to never be afraid of ghosts/spirits, as if they existed, he would have seen his grandma again, the person he loved the most until she passed away. First story, when I was 12, one of my aunts, dad's sister, was visiting us after years of living outside my country. At night, they were remembering stuff from the past, and started telling me and my siblings about their childhood stories. At some point they talked about all the horrible things that their stepmother did to them. From forcing my dad to sleep on their house roof at night, to breaking plates on my aunt's head when she didn't like the food this woman cooked. Out of nowhere, my aunt turns very pale and starts to hyperventilate, then choke. Then in between what we thought was a panic attack, she said something along the lines of, "Leave. Alone. Fucking. Mouth." And she passes out. A neighbor from across the street was a doctor, so my dad ran to get her. She checked her, and she said she was good, and looked like she was just sleeping. Out of nowhere, my aunt wakes up and starts crying nonstop. The doctor and my dad tried calming her down, and my mom hushed us out of the living room. While she was crying, I could hear she was telling my dad it was her. She was screaming at me. She wanted us to leave her alone, to get her name out of our fucking mouths. Years later, as I questioned if this might have been a response to stress caused by reliving those traumas, and not a supernatural occurrence, I talked to my cousins about it. They were all surprised, as this has never happened before, even though she would always tell them the stories of her stepmother, so my theory was out of the question. Thoughts? When my son was a baby, he started crying in his crib at about 3 a.m. I sat up, dreading having to nurse him back to sleep for the third time that night. All of a sudden, I hear a soft, sweet, woman's voice over the baby monitor say, "Shh. Don't cry, go to sleep." And my son settled right down back to sleep. In my sleep-deprived state, I was like, cool. She's got him, and I went back to sleep myself. When I woke up that morning, I was like, did I just let a ghost nanny take care of my baby? Can she come back tonight? She did not, but I did constantly see orbs fly around over his crib over the video monitor, which were clearly not bugs or dust. One morning at a friend's sleepover I rolled over. It was one of those dazed moments where I wasn't sure if I was asleep or awake. I looked up and saw my grandmother above me. She told me she loved me very much and was so glad she had so many years to love me. She also told me that my boyfriend was wonderful and we'd have a happy life together. A few minutes later I got the call that she had passed away. I genuinely believe that on her way out of this plane she took the time to say goodbye. The last time I had seen her I made her my priority at the family dinner because I loved her so much and hadn't seen her recently. I pulled up pictures of the guy I was dating because I wanted to catch her up. We'd only been together a few weeks at this point. But that didn't matter. She asked if we were serious and I said, "Yeah, I think we are. He's amazing and I really don't want to spend my life away from him." So her last words being that he and I would be happy together was beautiful. I sent her a Facebook message on our wedding day to tell her how much she meant to me and how glad I was to have her blessing. It's silly, but I didn't know how else to get a message down for her. So weird story that made me quickly question what was real and what wasn't. When I was around, let's say 8 years old and my brother was 6, we had been playing video games in my room while my dad and mom watched football downstairs. For a while we had lots of fun. That was until I had a really bad chill down my spine. I shrugged it off before I noticed my brother get a chill as well. He continued playing the game, so I just thought if he wasn't worried then neither should I be. Everything went smoothly well, not for long. My brother paused the game. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I then heard a humming sound of what seemed to be a little girl. I nodded. "The humming, right?" I asked him. He nodded as well. The humming was coming from the hallway right outside our room. We began to be very nervous because me and my brother were the only children in the house. The door was shut, thankfully, so we did not see anything. After a few seconds of the humming, it stopped and we heard footsteps from the attic. The thing about the attic though is that nobody ever really goes up there. At the time neither me nor my brother had been ever up there and my parents only went up there once each. Once the footsteps stopped and nothing else happened, we opened the door to see only the hallway. The next day we told our parents in great detail what had happened and they did the whole parent thing saying, "Oh, you probably just heard us, it was your imagination." Needless to say, if I didn't believe in ghosts before that incident, now I did. I slept over at my buddy's house. Woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of a woman crying coming from right outside his bedroom. I figured it was his mom arguing with another family member, so at first I felt very awkward rather than scared. Then things began getting more intense. She started screaming $7. "You did this for $7. And as she began getting louder and louder, I thought I might need to intervene before someone got hurt. I stood up, walked to the door, grabbed the handle, twifist, opened the door. Instant dead silence. Every sound I heard died in a heartbeat. It went from a World War II war zone to being able to hear a mouse fart. Outside his room, every light in his house was off, there was no one else awake, nothing. I still can't explain WTF happened. I woke my friend up and he told me he once saw a lady in a white gown walking up his steps and thought it was his mom, but when she didn't respond to him calling out to her, he followed her up the stairs and when she turned a corner, she disappeared. Then one day when they are moving out of this house, his cousin and sister arrived to the new house after grabbing some things from the old one and tell everyone that they swore they saw a girl in a white gown standing at the upstairs window as they pulled out of the driveway. Me and my friend never told anyone about our stories, so his cousin and sister said they saw what they saw without any prior knowledge of the situation. So, you know how kids see stuff when they're little? This is one of those stories. When I was younger, I was petrified of the man. I don't remember any of this because I was too young, but apparently on multiple occasions I would stand completely still and verbally whisper, "Who is that man?" and when questioned what he wants I would say, "I don't know, it's the man." Anyway, most people would blow that off, but I happened to have 3 younger sisters. 2 of which had similar experiences. Petrified of the man, or for my other sister, the guy. My mom was super creeped out and started seeking religious guidance. LOL, for real, she thought there was a demon in our home. So, growing up I was always told about this, and when I questioned it as a teenager my mom brought me a photo. A photo of me as a baby. I'm in a rocker, the TV is off behind me, and there is a perfect glare of a close-up man. Distinctively looks like a 50 to 60-year-old man. Oddly enough my parents took picture from multiple angles that night. It's right when they remodeled the living room. There is nothing in the room to cast a shadow or make it appear like a man's face. Well, I'm suspicious but never really believe. But then one day, I'm at my parents' house at 24 and my 2-year-old is staring up my parents' steps and whispers, "Daddy, there's a man." I nearly shit my fucking pants. Elevator ghost. In 1997 I was stationed in Germany while in the US Army. I met a little German girl who captured my heart. This year will be our 21st wedding anniversary. She lived in an apartment building on the 5th floor and a couple towns away from where my barracks were. I would go stay at her place on the weekends, for puzzle cutting classes. So, One of the things I love about Germans is their ability to maximize space. Underneath the apartment building was a parking garage. There was a parking lot out front that I used mostly, but on cold days, I used the one underneath the building. She didn't drive, so her designated stall was empty. She gave me the code to access the garage, but if I parked outside I had to buzz her apartment from a keypad downstairs. She would buzz the door open and I could then access the elevator. If you took the elevator down to basement garage, a motion-sensored light would activate when the elevator door opened. Conversely, if you entered the hallway to the elevator from the garage, the light would turn on. Additionally, the elevator was huge. However, there was partitioning doors in the elevator, so normally the elevator is small. If you were moving in or out of the building, you called the housemeister, who would unlock and open the partitioning door, and the elevator tripled in size so you could move your furniture. So one night I went to see my girl, rang her apartment, and she buzzed the door. As I walked up to the elevator, the doors were opening, but no one exited. I found that odd, but stepped in anyway. By this point in my life, I had had several supernatural encounters. See my other posts on this thread, and could sense when something was amiss. When I stepped into the elevator, I turned around like normal, smashed the number 5 button and waited, but the door didn't close. I instantly felt the presence of something sinister. It seems like whatever it was hiding in the dark part of the elevator behind the partitioning doors, peering at me through the gap. I had the overwhelming desire to step out and take the stairs, but I didn't. I just smashed the number 5 again. And as these years have gone by, I've had less and less dreams about him. Now I don't dream about him at all anymore. To date, my brother has had one dream about him when he was about to graduate college. And I'm so proud. Dream. It actually took me a long time to realize I don't dream about him anymore. I still dream about their house all the time, but it's always empty. I had one single dream about my grandmother, and it was her in her kitchen making dinner with her back to me, which is a pleasant memory of how she was in life. When it reached the 5th floor, they banged open again and I lurched my scared body out. It was so loud that my girl opened her door down the hall. As I approached, she told me to quiet down or I would wake up the other tenants. Apparently I was white as a sheet, because she then asked me what happened. What's wrong? I told her that her blankety blank elevator is haunted and tried to kill me. I took the stairs until we got married and had to use that cursed elevator to move the 11,000-pound couch she had. First of all, I am a believer. Always have been. However, I had an event recently that solidified it, or should I say, a few events. On Black Friday, my wife left me at home with our sleeping kids, 1 and 3. The 1-year-old slept in our room so as not to disturb my other child. Around midnight, the youngest wakes up screaming bloody murder, so I go up and start rocking him. He's falling asleep when I heard the telltale signs of a toddler's feet running on a wood floor. As I look over, I see my son run into the dark room I am in. As I'm about to say, "Hi Nathan," I notice it isn't him but an apparition of a child. In the time it took my brain to process this, it disappeared into the ether. I tried to justify this as the light in the hallway playing tricks on me, but it was too real. My heart jumped nearly out of my chest when it happened. Since then, a few random things happened. I had a bottle of shoe polish fall on my head over a door. The bottle was on a counter behind the door, and the bottle fell on my head when I was next to the other side of the door. Random toys go off all the time at night. This one is easily explainable, I understand. The final event was a few weeks ago. I went upstairs to use the bathroom and my wife was at the bottom of the stairs in the living room. While in the bathroom, I heard a male talking outside the door, assumed it was the TV. When I came out, she asked me if I was talking to her and I said no. TV was off. We both heard a man's voice clear as day talking in the upstairs hallway. Almost immediately after my mom passed away, her room would start having similar activity to her being in it. Either window would be randomly open on hot days and closed on cold. At night the lights would come on, which could be seen from under the door to her room. Near constant clacking could be heard from her keyboard on the other side of the wall while I was sitting at my desk. There was a time where her fiancé's photo and frame was on the floor, and another where the same photo, after being put back up, was whipped across the wall and shattered. There was a constant feeling of being watched when entering her room, though it never felt angry or oppressive. 2 super bizarre cases where, when I was out doing a grocery run and then coming back to find a picture of her smack in the middle of the living room staring at the entrance. In addition to this, my brother had been with me at the time of the strangest one, a picture in the hallway being lifted and thrown against the opposite end of the hall. I saw a partial bit of the frame, but whatever was holding it was obscured by the wall. The partial bit of the frame disappeared quickly and it was followed by the sound of smacking of the frame against the wall. My brother noted that I looked speechless and terrified. I know this probably sounds stupid and whatnot, but I still don't believe in ghosts. I believe we will find out there's more after death.